As we enter into this new world of geopolitics, the next 100 years are going to be very interesting. I think that we're currently living in very interesting times as things are shifting. We now have the rise of China and this like anti-US faction that's been kind of growing for a while now with China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela, and a lot of other people are probably going to begin to continue to grow on that. I mean, there's also the middle players that haven't really chosen a side just yet on what they're going to do. There's BRICS, all this stuff. We are entering into a more normal time historically, like we've seen before, where there's multiple powers. But China, the US being some big ones, which means inevitably that in the next 75 years, we're probably going to lose some countries. More than likely. I'm not saying that we're going to be living in another imperialism day. I don't think imperialism is necessarily going to come back just because there's not just one singular power. For most of my lifetime, pretty much, all of my lifetime, and more than likely if you're watching this and you're younger than me, then for all of your lifetime too, there's really only been one singular power. You're going to have to be like 35 years old or up to remember when there was a world where there was two major powers. And you got to be even older than that to remember a world where there was like three or more. Obviously before World War II, there was like 4, 5, 6, 7. You could kind of say, but that's more of the normal thing historically. And remember, when you go back to those times just before World War II, you look at the world map and there's less countries than we've ever had. I mean, just play Hearts of Iron 4. Like, there's not that many countries to play as because there were just not that many sovereign nations. So many places had gotten eaten up. Now, I'm not saying that imperialism is going to take back over. I'm not thinking that like the world's going to regrow empires, but definitely spheres of influence is going to get pushed. And in the meantime, we could see certain nations not make it into the next century. So here's my list. If I had to make a prediction on 5 countries or just 5 regions, some of these might just be straight up regions that might not make it in the next 75 years. I think that are likely, some of them I would even say likely will not make it in the next 75 years. The first one is a kind of an obvious one. Whenever this like conversation is had when it comes to countries that probably won't make it, the big one is obviously the Maldives. The Maldives and low-lying countries because of climate change. Now, I've obviously, with the intro of this video, I've kind of like framed this video as being more of a geopolitical video, but you cannot ignore climate change. You can't ignore rising sea levels. So the Maldives is probably the first nation to go. Other Pacific Island nations will probably go. Tuvalu, Samoa, everyone out there, kind of out there by Australia, or some, you can consider them more part of the oceanic region. Now, some of them might not necessarily lose, in the case of the Maldives, they might literally just disappear. Some of them might just lose so much land and get so poor that they need to just be adopted by another great power. They need to be just, have the U.S. take them in, or Australia, or India, or something like that. That's purely just a climate change thing, and I don't think we're really going to be able to stop that, to be quite honest. I mean, they've been talking about climate change for like the last 20 years, and it's really looking like we're not going to avoid this thing. Maybe we slowed it down a little bit. I mean, wishful thinking, we slowed it down, but for the most part, this is happening, which means sea level rise is going to happen, which means we are going to lose some places, and we're going to lose lots of territory. Bangladesh and the Netherlands also pretty, two low-lying countries, but we're not going to lose them as 2 countries. They're still going to exist. They might lose territory. Maybe not for the Netherlands. They've been prepared for this. Bangladesh could get deeply, deeply impacted because obviously they are not as rich as the Netherlands. They're not going to be able to build the same things as the Netherlands have been able to master in the sea. So I think those are all factors. When it comes to the second place, you looked for sure at a lot of places in Africa. The first place that comes to mind, so the first one was kind of, the Maldives, but also the Oceania region, the Pacific island nations. I'm on to number 2 now. I go to Africa, and my mind immediately goes to the newest country that was born in the world. That's South Sudan. South Sudan is the most recent country. It's only like 14 years old. I think it became independent back in 2011. It is not doing too well over there. It still faces a ton of struggle. as there are a lot of other countries in Africa that struggle. But South Sudan is, I think, a big one that a lot of people watch out for. Sudan in general also struggles. But remember, I mean, Sudan historically, first of all, Sudan has the most pyramids on Earth. It actually has more pyramids than Egypt. Usually when you date back historically, Egypt controlled a lot of that land for a lot of its history. Not to say that that would happen again. I don't really know what the circumstances that would have to happen to be able to make Sudan just disappear, but I would put a lot more emphasis on South Sudan and some of the other poorer regions in Africa. Look for those places to either get eaten up by neighbor or just have, I don't know, what could happen. I mean, we're going to see inevitably the rise of powers around the world. India, China, Russia, Europe, the U.S. is obviously going to be there. So these countries could either be de facto controlled, they could basically be puppeted. There's a lot of different ways that these countries could basically disappear from the way things are. You could see like more like a federalized. First of all, Africa has always talked about like the United States of West Africa, the East African Federation. Maybe something like that could occur as well, where you kind of see something like the EU form in the African continent, but it eventually gets to a point where it just becomes a singular nation. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the African Union. There's a ton of struggles that would have to go through. That would not be a very easy thing to make happen, but I think it's possible. If I'm forced to make predictions about countries that will no longer exist in the next century, South Sudan is definitely a big one. Here's kind of a controversial one, but I think it is possible that North Korea doesn't make it to the next century. I think it is, whatever happens, I just hope it's peaceful, but North Korea is not in a good spot, as you can imagine, and it all depends on what China feels. If China is basically propping up North Korea, China and Russia. Obviously back in the beginning times of North Korea's independence, they're really propped up by the Soviet Union during the Korean War in the 50s. Now it's definitely more China. China does not want to see a unified South Korea that owns the entire peninsula, but 75 more years. First of all, North Korea has existed for about 75 years now. Does it have another 75 years in it? I don't know. First of all, I want to say that I don't think it struggles quite as much as American media says it's struggling. I think that they're okay, but they're okay because China kind of wants them to be okay. But I think China gets a little bit annoyed of North Korea and their antics, and they know North Korea is kind of this kind of insane little state that they got going on there. Maybe not insane. I don't want to call them insane because they're clearly playing a smart diplomatic game. They were smart enough to know we need to build nukes. That's the only way to keep ourselves sovereign. But I don't know if they have another 75 years. And if I was forced to choose, I think they could struggle. But again, it's going to depend on what China wants. If China does not want them to collapse, then they just won't collapse, period. This is a scary thing because even the U.S., even if they could somehow come in there and cause South Korea South Korea to unify the peninsula, you take out Kim Jong-un and the whole family, which there have been plots apparently. That was a recent development, I guess, that was leaked back in 2019. I was just reading news reports about that there was a failed small campaign that failed when Trump was in office the first term. Definitely go look it up. It failed drastically, but it was a small team of American soldiers. Think SEAL Team 6. I don't think it was SEAL Team 6, but think of a small team that landed in North Korea after the meeting between Kim Jong-un and North Korea. Some weird stuff happened, and North Korea didn't really talk about something leaked recently, but just take a look at that. So 75 years, we'll see North Korea. That's the third nation on this list. I'm kind of cheating because I'm going regions here, but because I did say island nations, I kind of just said Africa. Third one was kind of the first time I ever picked North Korea. It has to be said, though, nations that border Russia. There's a very, very good chance that nations that border Russia do not make it to the next 75 years. It has been very apparent since 2008 when Russia first went after Georgia, then when they went after Crimea and Ukraine, and now they're going after Ukraine, that countries that border Russia might not make it to the next 75 years. Now, if you're in NATO, you're much more likely to make it. I guess the reverse is also possible, but I gotta be real. I really am not buying that. There's so many wishful thinkers out there that think that Russia's going to collapse, and I kind of think that is more insane than anything else. I think that's more insane than North Korea collapsing. I think that's more insane than anything else that I'm going to predict here today in this video. I do not predict Russia just ceasing to exist by next century. They're just too big, too powerful, too chaotic. I don't think the world can allow Russia to go into civil unrest and the whole federation break apart. So many people are predicting that since the invasion of Ukraine. I think we can safely say now, 3 years later, Russia is not collapsing. They might struggle severely, economically severely, but we're not going to see another dissolving of like the Soviet Union that happens to the Russian Federation. That's just not going to happen. There's just no way. Countries that border Russia much more likely in the next century to disappear. Ukraine might be one of them. We still don't know what's going to happen. Ukraine absolutely might be one of them. But also look at Georgia. Look at possibly Azerbaijan. Now, Armenia has an alliance with Russia right now, but kind of keep that in mind. Mongolia isn't as safe. Mongolia has been safe for a long time just because no one is willing to take it over. Russia or China can take it over, but it's going to piss off the other one. So Russia, China kind of leave Mongolia there. But something happens to NATO. For instance, if the U.S. backs off of NATO, well, then maybe those NATO countries won't be as safe. Maybe the Baltics goes. The Baltics have had to deal with the Soviet Union for a long time, with the Russians and the Soviet Union for a long time. Finland was formerly a part of the Russian Empire. I seriously doubt that stuff. I think we could maybe see just Belarus join Russia in a completely, like, think of the Anschluss of Austria. I mean, obviously, Lukashenko's been very cool with Russia. I could definitely see them just do a complete annexation, and then we lose Belarus. Maybe we don't lose Ukraine. Maybe we lose Belarus. But that's definitely got to be number 2 on the list. Anything that borders Russia, I would definitely be worried. Now, I'm going to be honest, I kind of went in order of what likelihood I think. So that's why North Korea is 3rd. That's why a lot of the smaller, Pacific Island nations is 1st. This is the least likely to happen in my personal opinion. But in the next 75 years, I think, well, see, this is kind of, I don't love this argument. All I'm saying is that I'm a little worried about the UK. I mean, that's been here for like 10 plus years now, but the UK seriously worries me. Every time I hear things about what's going on over there, I mean, there's apparently another movement for Scotland. I'm not saying maybe the United Kingdom doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist the way it exists right now. I think maybe the UK does still exist, but they lose some territory. They lose Northern Ireland. They lose Scotland. Those would be the big ones. I really worry about the UK. The more news I hear about it, I'm just like, man, what is going on over there with the internet ban over there, with the child restriction stuff, with the protests, and just the chaos. I mean, Europe as a whole does worry me with what the migration stuff that you're hearing about and the protests, and it just feels like there's this weird fight back and forth for the soul of Europe for the next century. And I don't really know what is going to happen here. It kind of freaks me out a little bit. I hope they figure it out. They always talk about like how Europe has really struggled when it comes to innovation. I don't know any big AI technologies that Europe is heading right now. I don't know what's going to happen to the EU. Apparently I woke up this morning, the French government has collapsed, which kind of always happens, but still, I worry about Europe, but if I'm forced to make a specific choice in Europe, it would be the UK. I hope that things kind of get better right there. London is chaos. I visited London twice. It is a pretty chaotic city. I think that, I don't know. I feel like maybe it becomes a de facto, Canada that the U.S. is. I'm sorry, that is to the U.S. I mean, that's a scary reality. I'm sure that they roll their eyes at that, and that's super possible. But in 75 years, I don't really know. I mean, they're out of the EU. Maybe they rejoin the EU, and they realign themselves there. Maybe Wales goes independent, or Scotland goes independent. Maybe I would honestly say that Northern Ireland maybe reconnecting is, if I had to make a guess. But point is, and then Spain is another one that comes to mind. Spain in this form. Spain refuses to acknowledge recognize other autonomous movements like North Macedonia. And no, sorry, Kosovo. My bad, North Macedonia. But that's the country that maybe could disappear. Kosovo. They refuse to recognize Kosovo because if they recognize Kosovo, then Navarra could try to gain their independence, or Catalonia, or maybe even Galicia, Granada. But yeah, they're freaked out. There's a bunch of different languages over here. Spain is kind of a worry, but it's just kind of Europe as a whole. Moldova, Transnistria is not a real, not officially recognized place. So I don't think you can count that. But it's kind of a worry about Europe. But UK for sure. It's funny because you always hear about, I think, the draconian things the US does, but here in the US, we always hear about the draconian things that I feel like the UK and Canada do, or Australia does. New Zealand less so, but out of the Canuckus region, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, out of that whole region, I feel like we oftentimes hear about the crazy stuff they're doing. I think that we, as the U.S., we take up a lot of the limelight. We're oftentimes doing the crazy stuff. But, I mean, UK too, man. They worry me. I know that their prime minister right now does not have the greatest polls. So I don't really know what's going on. It seems like they're kind of in a similar situation that we're in, where they don't like any politician that they're electing. But anyways, this was just a little prediction for the future. Let me know what you think. What country might not exist in the next 75 years? I'll see you next time.